Hi, I'm Noelle. I'm going to cover setting up at the wheel for a beginner today. I have a pug of clay, and it's called a pug when it's extruded, so that means it's recycled clay. All right, so the clay I'm using today is a white clay, and I'm going to cut a piece off for my first time at the wheel. So I have a wire here, and I'm going to cut off approximately 1.25 pounds to 1.5 pounds. All right. I'm going to weigh it, and I have just shy of 1.5 pounds, so that's perfect. 1.5 pounds is a great starting point for a beginner because it's enough to learn the movement and get your hands all around the clay, but it's not so much that it feels overwhelming. So I have to prepare the clay for the wheel. We're going to do a form of wedging called ram's head wedging, which is a pretty low-key way to start the wedging process. And I'm right-handed, so my right hand is my dominant hand. So for this wedging, I'm going to have my left foot in front, and I'm going to put my hands around the clay like this. What's important is that my thumb pads are together for this amount of clay, and that my hands are around it on both sides, and I'm keeping it tight under my hands. So this is my wedging table. And so it's a really sturdy table, so I can put a lot of movement and force as I wedge. So it's actually kind of a gentle movement, but the more clay you have, the more the table has to be firm and withstand that movement. So it's a gentle push forward. So you can see that's how much I'm pushing forward. And then I'm going to rock it back almost 90 degrees here, and then do another push forward. So I'm lifting up my hands and I'm tilting it, and I'm doing a gentle push forward. So because my hands are cupped tightly around it, the clay can't snake out on the sides. And I'm going to do this for approximately 30 seconds, 30, 45 seconds. And it's getting the clay a little softened because it was in a bucket. And it's also making sure that I don't have any air bubbles in the clay. What's important on wedging is that you're not using your fingers. So if you watch carefully, you can do it without using your fingers. Your fingers are never squeezing the clay. All the movement is happening in this strong part of your hands, right in here, okay? You should be able to see a spiral form on the sides. And then it should look like an abstracted ram's head from the front, right? If you want to check how you're doing, you can cut it in half and see if you have air bubbles. Let's take a look and see what that looks like. So I'm going to cut my clay in half, and I'm going to check. So I don't see any air bubbles, which is great. But now that I've cut it open, I'm going to put it back together and wedge it up again. Now that I'm back to this shape, I'm going to roll it on itself. And so I have kind of a tube-like shape. And then I'm going to turn it on one end. So the spiral is facing down and the spiral is facing up. And I'm going to firmly pat it down into the table, forming a gumdrop shape. I want the gumdrop shape to be pretty symmetrical. And so when I look at the underside, I want to see a pretty symmetrical form. Okay. So now that I have my clay ready to go, I'm going to bring it over to the wheel. Sometimes I like to get a few pieces ready to go for the wheel, just so I don't have to keep getting up and back. All right, so we're gonna walk over to my wheel here, and I'm gonna show you my wheel setup. Okay, now I'm at my wheel, and at my wheel I have my clay. I have 3 tools I recommend you get started with. I have a Cheryl Tools blue silicone rib. I have a Dirty Girls wooden compression rib called the Ex-Boyfriend. I have a needle tool. And then I have a bucket of warm water with just a round yellow sponge. And then I'm throwing directly on a Dirty Girls bat that has a bat insert. I like this system a lot. It saves shelf space and it's really gentle on my hands. I am right-handed, so my dominant side is controlling the pedal, and I want to make sure that I'm totally square at the wheel. So I'm going to position my body relatively close, and I'm going to move my pedal around until it's in the exact right position. So my pedal isn't too far away and it's not too close. All right, once you feel nice and square at the wheel, you want to keep in mind that any of the movement you do, you want to hinge at the hip. So if I'm going down, I'm hinging at the hip. I want to protect my back, so I'm not rounding and going down into the clay like that. I also want to keep my upper body really tight and keep my elbows grounded the whole time. So that's a really, really important thing to remember. The other thing is, I never touch the clay when the wheel is off, and I always use both hands on the wheel. So I'm never really doing anything in isolation with one hand. Okay, so I'm going to look at my bat insert, and I'm going to find the middle of it, just eyeball it. I'm going to put my clay right in that middle. Once I feel like it's right in the middle, I'm going to use this part of my hand to firmly attach it. So I'm going to pound with the strong part of my hand, not my fingers, to make sure that it's adhered to the masonite, okay? When I do that, I want to make sure I'm not smashing this into oblivion. I still want to have some height here, okay? And I also want to be mindful that I'm not distorting my round gumdrop shape too much in any one direction. So this is what it looks like right now. Okay. I can also just spin it and make sure it's right on the middle. So at this point, I'm just manually spinning the wheel. It helps beginning throwers a lot if you have all the parameters well established before you even get your hands wet. Okay, so I'm going to put some water on my hands, like quite a bit of water. And I'm digging my elbows into my legs. I'm going to start with my left hand firmly cupped around the clay, and I'm going to give who's ever in the room with me a thumbs up, okay? And so this part of my hand, you can actually see, is touching the clay predominantly. So I want you to keep in mind that you're always going to use the strong part of your hand. And my hand is cupped around the clay. I'm going to do just a slight compression down to push the clay even further and attach it more securely onto my masonite bat. So my right hand, I want you to also give me a thumbs up, and it's going to flip, and they're going to puzzle together like this. Okay? All right, I'm going to do a little speed. And as I'm doing some speed, my right hand is going to shift. And so I'm basically shifting it to the same position as my left hand. So this is the final position of my hands. That's just the beginning setup, okay? Notice that my thumbs are crisscross. I will tell you this is one of the ways I teach it, and this is my preferred method of throwing, but there are many, many ways to throw. So this is just one method, all right? You'll notice that I'm getting a lot of water. All right, so I'm starting here, and I'm moving my right hand down. I like to keep my thumbs crisscrossed because as I pull my clay up into its first cone, my thumbs are doing some counter pressure down. If you look at the clay, I want your clay to always look glossy. If it's looking dry or it's feeling warm or you feel tension, you don't have enough water. All right, so the first movement once I have it attached is I'm going to go into my cone. Note that my wrists are in the back and my elbows are firmly pushing down into my legs as I squeeze and pull the clay up to the sky. Let's try that one more time. I'm going to compress it down after this, but I'm going up into my cone, my thumbs are crisscrossing and doing some gentle downward pressure. My wrists are, if we think of the wheel like a clock, my wrists are somewhere between 5 and 7. It's very important that they're not out here like this. If they're out here like this, I don't have enough force to push my clay into the middle of the wheel. So this method is trying to get your clay right into the middle of the wheel. It's called centering. And the centering has, I call it the 3 C's. Centering, coning, compression. All right, so we're going to go back to that coning position. Note my thumbs are crisscrossed and doing some gentle downward pressure. And I'm squeezing with, again, the strong part of my hand as I gently go up towards the sky. And if you look at my clay, if I spin the wheel now, it looks a lot more on center than it did when I started. But you see there's still a little wobble there? It's not on center yet. So now I'm going to compress my clay down. My left hand is firmly on the bat. I'm going to give you a thumbs up again. And I'm going to connect my hands here. So my hands are always touching when possible on the wheel. Remember, the rule of thumb is I don't want to touch the clay when the wheel is off, and I want to keep my hands always connected. I also want my hand movements always slower than the wheel speed. All right, so my hands are connected here, and I'm going to do a compression down. My left hand is still firmly cupping the clay on this side. All right, now let's take a look at it. Is it on center yet? What do you think? I think it looks pretty good. We have kind of a patty shape now. We're going to do one more cone and compression. Just so you can see it, because normally when you're starting out, it's going to take you multiple times on the cone and the compression to get it on the center of the wheel. So here we go. On the coning, I'm hinging forward and I'm pushing my clay towards 12 o'clock away from me. My wrists are between 5 and 7, and my elbows are grinding down into my legs. There's no need to make your cone super high, okay? The higher it is, the harder it is to get down if you go really narrow and tall. So this is about how high I go for 1.5 pounds, okay? I'm going to go up here, and now the other part is the compression downwards. So on the compression down, I'm also hinging forward. I need to get more water. And I'm going to go into a low patty shape. All right, you can see my clay looks nice and centered now. And so that's the first step when you get on the wheel. For centering, you want coning and compression. I call it the 3 C's, the foundational start of getting started with your cylinder on the wheel. Is that okay? We're going to review the 3 C's one more time because throwing at the wheel is a very technical move. Okay, so let's review. I want your body symmetrical, and I want your legs squeezing the pan if possible. My right foot is mostly under my right knee. It's not way out in front of me, and it's not too close to me either. And so you want to think about driving a car, and the proximity of that pedal being in a comfort zone for you. I like to have my left foot, which is my non-dominant foot, kickstanded. And so then I'm squeezing my left leg and doing some, and I have some stability from that side. Some people prefer to put their left foot on a brick. So if I have my left foot on a brick, my legs are naturally at the same height. And I recommend that for beginners because it creates a much more symmetrical, even starting point. So I'm going to take away the brick because I prefer doing a kickstand with my left foot. And so my left foot is aligned with my stool in the back. And my knees are squeezing the pan. My piece is on center, but I just want to review again what we're doing. Our wrists are in the back. I want your wrists somewhere between 5 o'clock and 7 o'clock if this is a clock. And I want your elbows always driving down into your legs, and I want the momentum going directly away from you to 12 o'clock when you're centering. So let's just review that one more time. Get some water. We're going to go into the cone. My thumbs are crisscrossed. The clay is glossy. And I'm squeezing with the strong part of my hand, not my fingers, and I'm pushing towards 12 o'clock. Okay? I'm going to show you that one more time. And one method I use to help beginners, if they're struggling to not, to keep their fingers out of the mitts here. So I actually have beginners sometimes steeple their hands like this, and this prevents them from engaging with their fingers. And it forces them to use this part of their hand to do all the work. All right, so we're up in our cone. Again, notice where my wrist is and my alignment. Give you a thumbs up. And then, this is very important, my right hand, or your dominant hand, has to be tucked and touching your other hand. I'll show you it as if I was left-handed. Thumbs up. And this karate chop movement, my thumb is engaged with my other hand as I'm going down. When I'm pushing down in the karate chop, I'm going to show you which part of the hand you should be using. I want you to use the area between your lifeline and the start of your wrist. Okay? So when you're pushing down the karate chop, I don't want you to use any part of your hand above this top line in your palm. Got it? Okay. So as I'm pushing down, I'm hinging at the hip for momentum. I'm not muscling it down. Okay, now I have a low patty. You're going to notice that I have this area here, this undercut. And I'm getting a mushroom effect at the top. So how can I fix that? I'm going to take my hands and go cup them over the top, and I'm just going to bend the wall down into it. Okay? It mitigated it a little bit, but I'm not super concerned about it. My clay is now on center, and I'm ready to proceed. All right. So the next step is determining what you're going to be making, and that's directly correlated to the footprint of this piece here. So if I compress further down, this is going to get wider, meaning my piece eventually will be shallower and wider, my cylinder. So if the footprint of this is narrower, I'm going to have a narrower piece, and it's going to be taller, and it's going to be deeper. So keep in mind that this area determines a lot about your final piece. This is a good starting point for a basic cylinder for something like a mug. So when you're learning the wheel, your goal is always to be making a cylinder. The cylinder is the foundation of everything. And you can see as the clay is spinning, it's right in the middle of the wheel. I'm going to form a heart with my hands. Transfer that heart, and my thumbs are going to locate the center of the wheel. My thumbs are now pushing down into the middle. So they're sinking right into the middle of the clay. Notice how my hands are engaged around this part of the wheel. How do you know how far down to go? That's a really important decision and question. For the beginning thrower, I want you to leave about 1/4 of an inch. We're going to test the depth. So we're going to take our needle tool and we're going to put it right in the middle. And then I'm going to take my pointer finger and slide it down to where it meets the clay. I'm going to pull it out, and that shows me approximately how much clay I have left on the bottom. So I have a little bit of room. I could go a little deeper. So I've opened up the cylinder, the patty, right? And then I'm gauging the depth. I'm going to slide my finger down the needle tool until it touches the clay on the inside, and I'm pulling that out, and that tells me how much clay I have at the bottom. All right? Rule of thumb, you don't want the clay to be thicker than 1/2 an inch at the bottom. All right. So I'm back to this heart shape, and now I have an opening, but I need this interior space to be wider. So I'm going to pull it open. There's lots of ways to do this, but I'm going to show you my favorite one. So we're going to go back to that starting position, where your hand is very, very starting position at the very beginning when we compress the clay on. Giving myself a thumbs up again, and my right hand, my dominant hand, is going to slide in. My hands are connected. I'm using my middle finger, and I'm going to pull the clay open almost like a claw directly towards me. As I pull it towards me, I want to be very, very mindful that I'm not pulling up and I'm not pulling down. I want the floor of the interior of my clay to be nice and flat and parallel to this surface. Okay. So as I'm pulling it open, I'm going to pull it open just about the width of my yellow sponge. Perfect. That's a good starting point. Okay? All right. Now, if I kept pulling it open and I went really far, let's say I pull it open to here, what's going to happen is it's going to be so wide that it might collapse the piece on this shoulder. So how far open you go is very, very important. For a beginning thrower, with 1.5 pounds of clay, you don't want to go much wider than the width of your yellow sponge. Okay. Once we're open, we have, I'll clean out some of the water and show you where we're at. All right, this is what it looks like right now. And the next step that I'm going to do is I'm going to take my wooden compression tool, and I'm actually going to compress the bottom. And what this does is it creates a nice flat bottom, but it also establishes, sorry, I have some fuzz in it. It also establishes a nice 90-degree angle in the bottom corner. All right. So this is a tip from one of my teachers, Bree. She recommends you think about holding it like you would an instrument like a clarinet, okay? So it's tilted towards you at the top, and then this is at an angle, it's facing away from you, and you're gonna go right down into the middle, and you're going to compress. So one thing that's very, very important here is that this edge of the tool is about 3 o'clock on the clock, and I'm staying inside the lower quadrant between 3 and 6 on the wheel. All of your work from this point out in pulling is going to be between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock on the wheel. You do not want to have your hand or any of your position go above 3 o'clock, and you want to be mindful not to go beyond 6 or 6:30 at the most down here. So if this was a pizza, this quarter is yours. Okay. So after compression, it's going to be nice and flat on the bottom. The compression also helps prevent the dreaded S-crack. So the S-crack is when the water evaporates from your clay and it dries and it forms a big crack on the bottom, usually on the underside. And when that happens, we recycle your piece, all right? So it doesn't go through the kiln. My clay is a little wide at the opening at this point, so I'm going to squeeze it back in a little tighter. Okay, so this is my starting point for pulling the walls. All right, now we're going to pull the walls. For the walls, I want your hands together like in a butterfly shape, all right? Your inside hand is going to touch right in that interior corner, and your outside hand is going to be starting at the bottom. I position my hands usually between 3 and 4 o'clock. So they're going to start at this basic position, and what's going to happen is they're going to squeeze gently together, and you're going to pull the clay up to the sky. Notice my elbows are still digging into my legs. My inside hand is always going to be slightly higher than my outside hand. Just to review that one more time, my thumbs are connected, and on the interior, more challenging to see, but my middle finger is actually the one doing the pulling. And on my middle finger, it's not the pad of my finger that's doing the pulling, it's actually the side of my finger. So you'll notice that my wrists are still very much in the back, all right? And that is for stability. So now that we've established that this is the basic starting position, I want you to try it with a sponge. So you're going to take your pointer finger on your dominant hand. You're basically making a little taco, all right? So your inside hand is going to do the middle finger, this point, and it's the pointer finger on your dominant hand. Please note how my thumb on my non-dominant hand is sitting in the pocket on my dominant. So that connection is really important. So we're gently squeezing, and my outside hand is scooping a little bit at the bottom from the shoulder, and I'm squeezing to force that clay up the wall. I'm going very slow and gentle on these pulls, so you can see the technique and the movement. One thing that's very important to note is that my hands are going slower than the speed of the wheel. I also want you to pay attention to my throwing rings on the exterior. So it's my pointer finger on my right hand, my dominant hand, and then it's the middle finger on my interior hand, and do you see how my thumbs are connected the whole time? That's really important. My hands are also around 3:30, and my wrists are still angled from the back. My elbows driving down into my legs. As I get towards the top, I want to be very mindful not to squeeze too hard. And once I'm here, people get very nervous and they have a tendency to squeeze too much. I want you to just gently lift your fingers off. Okay, so our first goal is just to make a very basic cylinder. The throwing rings are these little lines on the side. If they look further apart, your rate of pull, meaning how fast or slow your hands are traveling up that wall is too fast. The squeeze between your fingers is very gentle. Note that as my wall gets higher, this thumb can't sit into this pocket as well, but it's still touching my dominant hand. Once I'm here, I'm very gently just releasing my hands up. Okay. The goal for the beginning wheel thrower is to work on getting a repeat cylindrical shape. I'm going to cut open the wall so you can see exactly how it looks. All right. Scrape a little bit off here. And so if we look at the cross section of our pot, just some terms. This is the floor of your piece, okay? This was the area we compressed with our wooden compression tool. This is the shoulder, right? The compression tool also has a 90-degree angle on the side. All right, we're looking at the cross section, and the interior corner ideally is 90 degrees. And so your inside hand is pulling with your middle finger on this edge of the finger, not the finger pad. I prefer being closer to this side. And so the movement is, you see how your inside hand is higher. It's always going to be a little higher. Your outside finger is going to scoop, and you're pulling the clay up this way. The more stable your hands are, the more connected they are, and the more stable your elbows are into your legs, the smoother the pull. So this is a pretty nice cross section of your piece. And our goal is to overall get even thickness in all the walls. Once you've pulled a cylinder and done it multiple times, then you can start to think about altering the cylinder and making other shapes. But this is a great starting point. I hope this was helpful and gave you lots of tips and ideas for getting started on your wheel journey.